activist, researcher, and independent scholar working in the areas of philosophy, sociology, and political theory. He is a member of the steering committee of the Peace in Kurdistan Campaign. Connor Hayes, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me, Erem.
Thank you. So let's start with, can you give us a brief overview of what's happening now in the region of Kurdistan, in particular about Turkey's invasion of South Kurdistan? What do you think is the aim of the Turkish government's domestic and foreign policy in the region?
Absolutely. So we can say basically Turkey's aim is to become a regional player in the Middle East. We must keep in mind here that there is a decline of Western influence and an opening up or a kind of power vacuum, and Turkey sees this as an opportunity. So it is trying to expand its influence in the region, especially in territories where there is a historical legacy of influence from the Ottoman Empire. This is why often this strategy is referred to as neo-Ottomanism. And it involves trying to expand political, economic, and military influence while also using ideological factors like Turkic identity, as we saw with the intervention in Nagorno-Karabakh with Azerbaijan, as well as religion or Islamism, which we see in Turkey's support for the Muslim Brotherhood or different factions in the Syrian National Army, intervention in Libya, and so on. There's also a territorial or land component that's important, which ties back to the National Pact, the so-called Misaki Milli, which was the final act of the parliament of the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman state, and it drew the boundaries for what it envisioned to be a new Turkish state. And it included what are today the borders of Turkey, which were established in 1923 under the Treaty of Lausanne, as well as the territories of Aleppo in present-day Syria and Mosul in northern Iraq, which are both Kurdish majority areas. So Turkey's strategy also involves trying to essentially annex these territories or expand its influence, which is why we see it going to war with South Kurdistan and occupying northern Syria or Rojava at the moment. And the Kurdish movement is the biggest obstacle to these plans. And it is important to understand a little bit here the basis of the Turkish Republic. It was to create a homogenous Turkish nation with a singular language, a singular culture, and so on. So any other identity to be assimilated, and in particular, self-determination movements from other identities represented a threat. This is why we saw the Armenian genocide and then genocidal policies against the Kurds throughout the 20th century, continuing until today. The basic aim is the elimination of the Kurdish identity and the assimilation into a larger Turkish nation by any means. We see now they're using chemical weapons as they did throughout the 20th century, such as in the Dersim massacre of 1938. And finally, we must understand this as a global issue. It is ultimately about NATO, which Turkey is a member state of, and which cooperates with Turkey at every level, trading weapons, intelligence, and the criminalization of the Kurdish movement under the war on terror. And this makes the Kurdish resistance movement so miraculous that has been fighting against NATO for now over 40 years, or just since 1984.
What do you consider to be the significance of the HDP in Turkey? What does the repression and attacks against the HDP indicate about democracy and the rule of law in Turkey?
The HDP is significant because it is a broad-based coalition of progressive elements across Turkey, including Kurds, elements of the Turkish left, feminist and women's movements, LGBT organizations, ecological campaigns, and so on. The basic agenda is to create an alliance of progressive and democratic forces to try to democratize the Turkish state and Turkish society and transform the entirety of Turkey on the basis of justice, sustainability, and equality. And the domestic policy of Turkey in the most recent period has been, as part of its attempt to become a regional player, a turn towards authoritarian control and an attempt to consolidate its power within the state. We saw notably after the 2016 coup attempt and the state of emergency that it was imposed afterwards. But its hold on power is shaky, in part because of the success of the HDP, which forced Erdogan's AKP to create a coalition government with the far-right MHP. HDP is a threat to the Turkish state ultimately because it represents a unity of progressive forces. Unity of opposition or progressive forces has always been a threat to power, which is why they try so hard to use tactics and policies of divide and rule. And it is significant also that they are using the war on terror to try to criminalize and delegitimize the HDP as part of propaganda war to hold on to power. This is why at every move they tried to link the HDP with the PKK, which again in the Kobani trial currently of HDP members. Ultimately, the HDP is the linchpin for democracy in Turkey today, and the repression against it is an indication of the state of democracy or lack thereof and rule of law in Turkey.
Why does the UK still is still list the PKK as a terrorist organization, even given a decision such as the ruling from the Brussels High Court that the PKK is not a terrorist organization? Very briefly.
Mm-hmm. The UK continues to ban the PKK as part of the global war on terror. This is ultimately an international issue, right? Terrorism or the anti-terror repression has a long history, but it essentially grows out of, in its modern form, the anti-colonial movements, the attempt to repress the anti-colonial movements, and the end of the Cold War to develop a new propaganda campaign for the global military-industrial complex, of which NATO is the global representative and the US is the key player. It is used to delegitimize any challenge, the war on terror, that is used to delegitimize any challenge to the unitary or sovereign state and to justify the expanding militarization of the state. So when you can label any organization as terrorist, it justifies every atrocity. So this is why it tries so hard, as I mentioned before, to link everything with the PKK. This is ultimately a political designation, and it is about the fact that the PKK and other organizations around the world represent progressive attempts to achieve self-determination and democracy for peoples that are repressed and of all kinds, right? Both Kurds and Turks and Assyrians and everyone else in Turkey. And the fact that it's a political designation, we can see this is why the Belgian government, even after the Belgian court ruling, continues to list the PKK as a terrorist organization, because it's part of the global political agenda of NATO in particular. So the Belgian ruling is important, and it is part of the strategy to push back against the criminalization, to get the PKK off the terrorism list and acknowledged and recognized as a legitimate political actor. But the main issue is to challenge the war on terror itself.
You are working now as a member of steering committee of the Peace in Kurdistan campaign. Can you tell us a bit about the campaign, such as why it was formed and the work that you do? I know you are very busy with publishing the statements and the developments, the latest developments in Turkey also keeps you busy as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'll try to give a broad background of what Peace in Kurdistan is and where it comes from. It was founded in 1994, emerging out of discussions with Abdullah Öcalan in the early 1990s. And the idea was to work with the Kurdish freedom movement, to connect the Kurdish freedom movement with the rest of the world, and to generate support for the peace process between the PKK and the Turkish state. It was founded in London, and it primarily works within the UK and Europe. Peace in Kurdistan is founded on the ideas of Abdullah Öcalan and seeks to embody them in its method of work. The main theme that animates, or the main heading of our work, is self-determination, or really the question of liberation and what the meaning of liberation, struggle, and freedom is in the 21st century. The main specific areas of our work involves aspects of trying to promote and generate support for the peace process. This involves the Freedom for Ocalan campaign, because history shows the centrality of Öcalan's efforts at a peace negotiations or a peaceful resolution of the Kurdish question, as well as delisting, or the right of the PKK as a legitimate political actor, as I mentioned before, while challenging the war on terror in general. The main point is that Peace in Kurdistan takes an internationalist view to these issues. It emphasizes the connections between issues and struggles, and attempts to build links between different issues and campaigns and struggles on the issues they face in common. In this democratic confederalism, it endeavors to organize at every level and in every, so there it works together with and attempts to put into dialogue with one another alliances of lawyers, networks of women's organizations, ecological campaigns, and issues around the war on terror, state violence, and political prisoners, to name a few. So the ultimate aim of Peace in Kurdistan is to be, you can say, the unofficial part of the ambassadors of the Kurdish freedom movement, and the effort to create an internationalist network and alliance of struggle and movements for freedom, equality, and justice.
Activist, researcher, and member of the steering committee of the Peace in Kurdistan campaign, Conor Hayes, thanks for your valuable comments today. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Erem, and thank you for all of the valuable work that you do.
Thank you.